In spite of being warned this week by a judge not to tamper with witnesses or jurors or try to interfere with the administration of justice, former President Donald Trump fired off a social media threat within the last 24 hours. If you go after me, I'm coming after you. Now, this threat, which Trump's team says is the definition of political speech, is part of the prosecution's case against Trump. A few hours ago, the trial judge gave Trump's legal team a deadline of 5 p.m. on Monday just to respond to a protective order proposal submitted by the special counsel. Now, Jack Smith cited Trump's threat, and he asked the court to prohibit Trump from sharing sensitive documents turned over by prosecutors, saying it could have a, quote, chilling effect on witnesses and impact the fair administration of justice. This comes after Trump pleaded not guilty in federal court on Thursday in Washington, D.C. at his third criminal arraignment in 4 months. Trump is charged by special counsel Jack Smith with conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights, all for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election and install himself as president for another term. The 45-page indictment also details how 6 co-conspirators assisted Trump by pressuring government officials on his behalf, promoting his lies about the validity of the election, and orchestrating a team of fake electors to sow confusion in Congress. Donald Trump's latest appearance in a court of law may have only been around 27 minutes, but he and his allies, they are working overtime to gaslight Americans and the court of public opinion. And what's one of their tactics? Well, painting this as a free speech issue.
This is a free speech killing indictment. Killing free speech, that's what it is.
It's criminalizing speech for this reason. What the president saw in the 2020 election was all these irregularities going on. He had every right to comment on that and act politically.
You're entitled to question whether it was honest or not. That's the uniqueness of the First Amendment. That's the uniqueness of America. But you know what? You shouldn't be prosecuted for your thoughts.
But the special counsel himself acknowledges on the second page of the indictment that the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. That's what the special counsel says. So don't let Trump's defenders insult your intelligence. Just think about it. If falsely claiming that you won an election were a crime by itself, that man would have been subject to indictments every other day by now. So this is not about speech. This is about Trump's actions, his conduct. And this indictment, it is action-packed. It first details Trump's and his co-conspirators, quote, use of deceit to convince officials like the Arizona's House Speaker and the Georgia Secretary of State to help reverse Biden's victories. And what was their basis? Well, debunked claims of widespread election fraud. When these officials refused, Trump and his allies organized fraudulent slates of electors in swing states that Donald Trump lost and then facilitated efforts to send the fake certificates to Congress. The goal of that, according to the indictment, was to create a fake controversy that would give then Vice President Mike Pence an excuse to either send elector certification back to state legislatures or even throw out these electoral votes altogether and declare Donald Trump the winner. The former president, in private and in public, then demanded Pence assist him in that plan when Congress would vote to certify each state's electoral votes on January 6, 2021. Mike Pence, he repeatedly refused, but Donald Trump kept that pressure up until the moment Pence was seated at the head of the congressional chamber. And when it became very clear that the Vice President of the United States at the time, Mike Pence, would not use authority he did not have, Donald Trump finally directed a mob of his supporters to march on the Capitol and, quote, take back our country. The violence that erupted at the Capitol, it endangered the Vice President and nearly every member of Congress. It also delayed the congressional certification of the 2020 election by at least 6 hours. When the Justice Department says this is a conspiracy to defraud the United States, I hope Americans all across our country understand the full weight of that accusation. Because no matter what name you checked on the ballot in 2020, this was an effort to defraud you. This is not just a rightful victor. It's not about a rightful victor in the 2020 election. This is not a lie about that. It's something even bigger. This is about a democratic process that defines this nation. A process that was carefully devised and endlessly debated by the founders and Donald Trump and his allies You know, they claim to revere these founders. They claim to revere that process. His effort to undo all of this, to attack our democracy, it ultimately failed. Millions of people across the country, though, they still believe Donald Trump's election lies. And our democratic process is more weaker for it. I'm no judge or juror, y'all, but to me, I think that demands accountability.